My name's Caroline Davis. I am the Managing Director of Outdoor Places Unusual Spaces, or OPUS for short, and we are a female-led multidisciplinary arts organisation working here in Birmingham to deliver amazing outdoor events. Today's session I want to talk to you a little bit about what we've delivered over the last year or so, some insights into producing in the outdoor arts world, hopefully some tips and tricks and some useful pointers for what it means to be producing multi-stakeholder events in Birmingham in the outdoor or found spaces. So OPUS deliver a range of different events, from festivals, large-scale outdoor spectaculars to smaller activations in different commercial spaces. We are adept at stakeholder management, working with different types of clients, from the arts world to the commercial world to quasi-independent bodies, you name it, we have worked with different people in different places and spaces. We've worked in zoos, we've worked in train stations, we've worked on trams, and all of these different events have a different requirement and a different range of practical challenges for us to address and work around to create memorable experiences for audiences. So in the last 18 months, OPUS have delivered a range of different events, and there are some that I just want to draw your attention to. So we delivered 3 high-quality outdoor events for Coventry City of Culture, happening in green spaces and community spaces away from the city centre, in people's shared environments, not in closed parks, in open spaces for people to come and join and enjoy high-quality outdoor arts in their local community. These were 3 amazing events called Party on the Green, which you can have a look a bit more about on our website, or you can watch a little video about right now. We have also delivered Motion House's Wondrous Stories, a large-scale spectacle that happened in Centenary Square in March 2022. The event was live streamed as well, so not only are we working in physical spaces, but we're working in digital spaces. The event was seen by nearly 50,000 people, both in person and online, and had huge challenges in terms of production, infrastructure, requirements, and being a big open city centre space. Again, separate challenges for us to deliver. Motion House's Wondrous Stories is still available to watch online, and you can enjoy the 50-minute production from YouTube, which includes all of the amazing dancers from the professional cast to the community cast, which were critical mass part of Birmingham 2022's festival programme. Really implore you to watch it if you haven't seen it already. It was a real spectacle for the city, and one that made people feel very proud of where they came from. Most recently, OPUS have delivered the festival sites for the Birmingham 2022 Commonwealth Games. We were active in 9 different sites in the city centre and 7 different neighbourhood sites consecutively across the 12 days of the Games. We had more than 1.5 million visits to those spaces, all of with their own individual unique challenges for each of those individual spaces and producers that were producing those events. Opus are committed to nurturing the future producing talent within the region, and we have an open door offer for people that are interested in doing more in the outdoors to come and speak to us. We are committed to nurturing female producing talent and production talent, and we love to invest in our staff and the freelance talent pool in ensuring that we have an inclusive and rich future of diverse voices that are creating and developing and delivering outdoor events within this city.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Phillips. I'm the events producer here at Outdoor Places Unusual Spaces. I've been working with Caroline for about 18 months now in this role, and I've been involved with delivering high quality, large scale events such as Wondrous Stories, the Motion House aerial spectacle back in March earlier this year, right through to putting CBSO 72 musicians in New Street Station, 3 events for City of Culture, called Party on the Green, and then more recently the festival sites here in Birmingham, for which I was lead producer for the Smithfield Festival site. So today we will be discussing what we've learned over 10 years worth of experience of designing, delivering events for a range of spaces. Though developing the creative offer, such as programming and shows, is incredibly important, we will today focus more on the practical, logistical and production considerations that you as a producer should incorporate into your event design. So one of the things that I wish someone had explained when I first started is what all the acronyms mean. It's not a bad thing to ask questions. We encourage questions. There's no such thing as silly questions. However, when people are talking in acronyms, it can be sometimes quite hard to follow along with what they're saying. So we wanted to give you a list of handy acronyms that we ourselves might slip into as we're talking through things today, but also you might see written down. And so we'll start off with EMP. So that is your event management plan. You might hear SAG, which is your Safety Advisory Group. From a production perspective, you might hear CDM, which is Construction Design Management. You might hear CAD, which is Computer Assisted Design. You might hear RAMS, which is Risk Assessment and Method Statement. HVM is another one, which is Hostile Vehicle Mitigation. NDA, if you're talking contractually, you might already know this, the Non-Disclosure Agreement. SFX, Special Effects. And finally, HSE, so Health and Safety Executive. So hopefully you find these acronyms useful. There is a long list of them and people slip into them all the time.
So in this section, I would like to talk to you about stakeholder-centric planning and working in the outdoors. What I think you need to remember that's different about producing for black box theatre or indoor spaces is that with found spaces, you are working in somebody else's space with somebody else's rules, customs, and things that are perhaps idiosyncratic to how they do things. You are going to have to learn how to work with that person with those rules and regulations in that space. Often that might mean working with, for example, a shopping centre and their commercial requirements, their fire regulations, their evacuation procedures, or their requirements in terms of insurance and that side of things. Again, in other public spaces like train stations, you might be having to deal with all of that, plus a much bigger emphasis on how you need to work with audiences in terms of crowd management and ensuring that you are also making sure that their core day-to-day delivery of being a train station can continue whilst you are doing your artistic intervention. Then you might want to be doing something in a street or in a public space. At that point, you're going to need to be very au fait with the rules and the regulations of the local authority. So here we are regularly working with Birmingham City Council and we are in a dialogue with them about permissions and rules. In the city centre, that might be through city centre management, the department that are dedicated to looking after the safe functioning of the city on a day-to-day basis. But if you're interested in doing work in green spaces and parks, then it is the parks department that you will need to be liaising with. Often there are forms that need to be filled in, permissions that need to be asked for, and essentially these are key stakeholders within your event. So the landowner is the first key stakeholder that you'll need to be liaising with in terms of how you want to present the work and what you want to do either with or for them. What is a stakeholder? Well, a stakeholder is any person or company or body that might have an impact on your event or your community arts activation. So they are going to have an impact on how you shape and design that event going forwards. Stakeholders can be internal or external. So external ones are the landowners that we've just talked about, but they might also be people from the Safety Advisory Group, a group that we'll talk about a bit later down the line, or they might also be from the emergency services, for example. It's someone that has a potential impact on your event that is not within your control. You also have internal stakeholders. Those are people that are either your staff or your supply chain. Often when you're producing for the outdoors, your supply chain is brought in by a range of different people, lots of people that are very specialised in what they do. What you must remember is that unlike a theatre plot or a theatre stage, if you need to have a light or put some lighting in or even move the lighting rig, there needs to be someone to do all of that stuff for you. And then you start getting into different kind of roles and responsibilities, which we're also going to go and have a look at in more detail in a moment. The critical thing is that when you're working in the outdoors, very little infrastructure exists. And so you're having to plan and develop the project by thinking exactly how you're going to do all of that, either move a light or bring a lighting rig in step by step by step. So this is where a really key acronym comes in, which is RAMS, which is your risk assessments and your method statements. Particularly thinking about the method statement element, how are you going to get the equipment that you require for this intervention into this space? What are the rules and customs of doing that within the space that you're in? Are there restrictions on those times? All of these things that you need to start scoping and having conversations with these stakeholders are about will then form another one of your key acronyms, the EVM, Event Management Plan. EMP is another acronym for that. So your EMP is a key document that we would create in any event that we're doing that is essentially your Bible of how you are going to run this event in this space, under the circumstances that you're working with. It's a key document that gets created and then is also shared with all of the relevant stakeholders. Just to come back onto stakeholders a bit more, other stakeholders that are really important are communication stakeholders. So that might be either an independent PR person that you're working with or the communications function of the organisation that you're working with, or you have to take on that responsibility yourself as that producer to think about how are we going to get the message out. So these are all another strand of stakeholders that you need to start thinking about in terms of how are you going to get the messaging of your event out. So thinking a little bit more about internal stakeholders and some of your supply chain or people that you might be working with, it's crucial that you create a really detailed event plan and timetable, not just for the times that you're going to be live, but also for the pre-production and for the get out. I think that many people working in the industry will understand that it's not just about showtime, it's about what happens before and what happens afterwards. And that's absolutely critical for the success of your event. So very early on, you need to be looking at get-in times and creating this kind of detailed schedule. This might be something that you work with either an event manager or a production manager to assist you in doing the detailed planning on. But the reason that this is important goes back to understanding those rules and customs and any impact that it might have on your planning. So for example, it might be that there is a road closure required, and for you to be able to get your equipment in, either through a public road or perhaps it's working in a shopping centre who says, well, you can only make this happen during non-shopping hours. You then need to be ensuring that you've planned and scoped that correctly with your supply chain. So that might mean that you need to make plans for out of hours activities, and these things might cost you more. This means that you've got to be doing a robust budgeting piece alongside all of the event planning and event delivery options. And one of our biggest tips, we'll do a tips section later on, is always to make sure that you've got sufficient contingency. But scoping at the beginning of your project is absolutely imperative. That's why involving these stakeholders, internal and external, to bring together the event plan and shape the budget is an absolutely critical part of outdoor arts delivery and planning.
So when it comes to designing your event, it is always important to consider it as an integrated process. You might be working to a client brief, so some of the site choices, the locations, for example, might already be set. However, when in your planning stages, it's important to consider the three main things at the start of your process: site design, audience, and the creative. All three feed into each other and inform each other. Firstly, let's look at site design. So everything is a decision which ultimately affects your audience experience. It leads to the improvement of the event on every level. It's a holistic process, and it's one that we always constantly remind ourselves of. Designing an event includes considered decision making on how you intentionally lay your site out, yes, but also what sponsors you have, what food you have, what traders you have there. Thinking about utilising, your existing topography in the site, thinking about what branding decisions you make, your decor decisions, everything. So the choice of location, first off, is so important. Consider what is around there and who, but we'll get to that in a second. For instance, are there existing structures that you can use for production and a back of house space? That in the long run is going to save you money budget-wise, and it will save you a lot of time install-wise as well. When you're there and when you're siting things within that location, think about what noise you've got around you. Think about the roads that perhaps border your event space. Think about public footpaths. I've seen several events where actually the right care and attention hasn't been given to acts and performances and installations within an event, and they've essentially just been plonked there, and you're not giving that artist or that space enough breathing work and the due care and attention that it requires. So think about noise levels, think about movement, think about distractions in that space, think about how you're grounding and anchoring that piece within your site. If you're working with a blank field, a blank space, blank canvas, think about what you're putting around that to kind of, give it a bit of treatment, give it a bit of a visual grounding within that space. So one of the most common things people will ask us is, why are you working there? And that might be because that neighbourhood perhaps has a bad reputation. But to that, we would say that is often where traditionally places haven't had enough love, they haven't had enough culture or arts or events. So why shouldn't we work there? Why shouldn't we go and take memorable experiences there? Historically as well, when it comes to considering site design and location, think about if there are events there regularly, if there have been events there previously. It's really important to do your research. It's an integral part of planning any event, and nobody wants to repeat things. So find out what happened there before, what worked there, how it looked, and then use that to challenge yourself and the audiences around that area to do something different and new. It's also key to do research into the history and the social context of the sites as well, mainly to help decision and design processes, but you never know what you might uncover to help inform the creative too. So access is also a big part of site design. Not only do we look at it within an infrastructure angle and think about building accessible bars, toilet facilities and track mat for uneven or potentially wet ground, but think about geographical accessibility too. Is the site that you're looking at in the middle of nowhere? Can you get there by public transport? Do you need to provide accessible parking in a field? Is it too cost prohibitive perhaps to travel there as well? It was an intentional decision for us to take the 7 neighbourhood sites out of a city centre and into greenfield spaces around Birmingham. We could have quite easily chosen a third civic centre space and put our event there. However, it was important for us to take it to people that perhaps can't travel into the city centre, that don't want to travel into the city centre, perhaps can't afford to. We wanted them to get their moment of the games experience as well. So whilst you're considering site design and location, the next big thing to look at is audience. We talk a lot about how important stakeholder relationships are, and ultimately your audience is one of your biggest stakeholders. From residents associations to councillors to schools to bars to offices and beyond. You have to put the time in to build those relationships and that trust. And to do that, you need to know who is immediately around there. Is it a heavily residential area? Are there large communities whose first language isn't English? Is it a part of a city centre that's only really busy at certain peak times? Putting in that time to build the trust will let you deliver authentic events with integrity. That could be done through town hall style meetings, through signage, through letter drops to residents. It all ultimately helps bring audiences in, bring the residents, bring communities in, feel part of the event and build that trust. Looking at how the space is used and by whom is important too. Whether it's teenagers playing sports, commuters or a transient audience. At Party on the Green, for example, we knew it was a residential area and we were going to get a bit of a drop-off for audience-wise around dinner time when people went home across the street to where they lived to have dinner and then come back out. So we planned our time and our programme around that. Simultaneously, we also transformed one of the sports courts where we knew people would be coming in and using that to play basketball and to be hosting games with their friends. We didn't stop those teenage boys playing at the one end whilst we had our giant mirror ball installation at the other. In fact, we welcomed that harmony between the transformation that we were bringing in, but still allowing that existing use of the courts as well. Finally, the third thing that we wanted to talk about was the creative. What do you want the creative to do for you? What does your client need the creative to do? It's important to really understand why you're programming one piece over another and stand by that. Think about if it's a sensitive piece which demands a quieter space. Size-wise, do you have the correct space for it? Is it too small a space for your vast big field, for example? Think about if it's suitable for the outdoors as well. Work for the outdoors needs to pull a crowd, it needs to be able to hold a crowd, it needs to have a punchy start and retain that audience attention. Audience attention spans are a lot smaller than they are, if you are going into an indoor space with a ticketed audience who have made an intentional decision to come and see that show. Also think about working towards a theme as well. Thematically, it's really easy to sell an event if narratively the audience can understand that all the pieces are connected, they're all tied around a certain message or a certain theme. From a marketing perspective, it's also really easy to sell an event that is themed around something as well. On the flip side of that, it does make it harder if you're trying to find 10, 12 pieces of work all about the same messaging as well. Finally, the last thing we would ask you to consider in terms of creative is looking at that schedule. Think about that audience journey. Think about what might be the first thing they see, and then naturally when that finishes, can they move on to another show? Can they then move on to another installation? Can they then participate in an activity? When you've got your programming matrix in front of you, it's really helpful to think of that audience journey through your event and what they might plan their day around. So in the midst of your site design, considering the political elements that come into play as well is incredibly important. So there's a couple of different sides to this. The first is tied to permissions and thinking about who you need to work with in regards to public realm work. So more often than not, you'll be working with a local authority and a city council, and with that comes a lot of red tape. There's a lot of procedures, a lot of policies that you have to be okay adhering to and working to. The second part of this is that you are giving a proudly visible platform to artists in spaces which aren't perhaps normally set up for performances and where there are very few prescribed rules for how you as an audience engage with this. The act of putting performers front and central who are disabled, who are queer, who are any part of any marginalised community is political. You are empowering them to take ownership of the space. With that, you need to consider a whole host of different things with how you look after them in that sense. So such as welfare considerations, how you prep the artists for performing within the public realm and what can happen around that. But also logistical considerations as well, such as suitable back of house facilities and even briefings with your stewards.
So I'm going to talk to you a little bit now, broad brushstroke, about some key things that you might need to know in terms of licensing and permissions if you are going to be creating an outdoor event. First of all, you may need a temporary event notice or a premises licence. These are things that you can find out more information from the local authority website, from Birmingham City Council in terms of the permissions and events process. They also do a really handy outdoor events guide that has recently been updated that you can download from their website, and we will also include a link to that within the resource pack. Temporary event notices and event licences depend on how many people that you are anticipating might be at your event. A temporary event notice will cover you for up to 499 people. Critical thing to note, that includes your staff on site, so if you need to include that within the 499 number, whereas event premises licences will cover you for more than that number. They both have an associated cost with them, again, so early on you need to decide so that you're factoring that into your budget. Other events licences and permissions that you need to seek if you are going to be playing music, recorded or live, you need to be in touch with PRS, PPL to ensure that you have a music licence. And you need to ensure that you're having these things printed and included within your event management plan, and that you have a copy of these readily available in case you are asked whilst you're on site delivering. A key top tip for PRS and PPL is that you need to ensure that you're passing that requirement on to your artists and acts, and that it's clear from contracting at the beginning that they will be required to supply you with this information. That's so that they can keep a list of everything that they've played and set lists, etc., and that it's not a big administrative burden for you to then collate all that information and supply it back to PRS, PPL afterwards. Thirdly, another big part of permissions is food and the governance and rules and regulations that are around if you're going to have food traders. We're not going to go into an immense amount of detail on that now. However, you do need to make sure that you are again liaising with the local authority with regards to the minimum number of stars required. So often Birmingham City Council will require a minimum 4 or 5 in terms of hygiene ratings for those traders. But there are lots of other requirements, detailed requirements, if those people are trading with GASH and their health and safety and regulations, etc., that you would need to ensure that your food traders are being compliant with, depending on where and how they are trading. This ultimately kind of leads us into a bigger point about health and safety and how you manage the health and safety process. So essentially, as the event organiser, all of the responsibility lays with you. You've got to have pretty big, broad shoulders, you've got to be pretty confident in what you are doing, but you've got to ensure that you are passing the risk and responsibility down to the various different people that are going to be working with you on the event. That may mean that you require the input of a dedicated health and safety manager, depending on how complicated it is, complicated event it is that you want to do. This will be ensuring that you are compliant with a raft of health and safety legislation, and that is essentially their job for you on site, is to ensure that you are compliant with all of those regulations, and so are your suppliers. They will help you be putting in processes in terms of the RAMS, another key acronym, which is risk assessments and method statements, so that your suppliers are doing that and that you are showing that that liability and those responsibilities have been passed down and you have checked them, and ensuring that the people that are doing things for you are doing them in a safe and managed way. It's the core job of a health and safety manager. Another job might be working with a production manager. And the reason that they are important is that if you are building anything within an event site, you could be subject to what are called CDM regulations, another great acronym, Construction Design Management Principles. That means the same responsibilities as to someone building a house are required of you as you build a stage. This could mean PPE, personal protective equipment, and ensuring that you're keeping all of the staff and crew that you might need to bring in to deliver your event safe. Again, you can pass that responsibility down to ensure that if you are delivering an event of that scale, that you're working with a principal contractor who is responsible for ensuring that all of the sign-ins, sign-outs and all of the requirements of CDM regulations are being followed. That includes safe working areas whilst these items are being built, so that you can then put the amazing arts and cultural content within it. These are specialist roles, and these specialist roles I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about in the next section about roles and responsibilities.
So we're going to talk a little bit about operational planning and health and safety planning now, and how integral that is to the initial stages of your event design and planning. So writing a checklist to help inform project timeline is key right from the off. Work backwards if you need to, from day 0 being your first day of getting. You might not know exact deadline dates yet, but start populating it. That's okay at this stage. Start writing down everything you will need to do. So the delivery of a safe event is ultimately the producer's responsibility. And so to do that, you need to build your team accordingly. Build an experienced team around you. No one person needs to hold every piece of knowledge for production, technical, health and safety, operational. So build your team accordingly. Make sure you've got that experience and those resources and that knowledge around you to support you in delivering your event. Don't scrimp on spending money to make sure that you've delivered a well-planned and safe event. Seeking consultation from an independent health and safety manager is invaluable on bigger events. They'll be there to inform your procedures, write event plans, and be on the ground to support the build, to support the break as well. Essentially ensure that your back is covered in terms of liability. On that, insurance is one key thing that you'll need to factor in and plan for budget-wise as well, making sure that you have an uplift in your public liability insurance so it covers your activities that might be a little bit different to what you might be doing normally within a building or within a venue. You'll also need to ensure that you have public liability from others involved in the event too. That's from freelance production managers right through to artists presenting work as well. Keeping on top of documentation is key. And there's absolutely something that can go on your operational checklist or to-do list right from the start. Detailed risk assessments, which pivotally are site-specific and event-specific, are key to inform what levels of safety mitigation you will need for your activities. All of these key plans will essentially then feed into one document which outlines quite clearly everything you will be doing and ultimately everyone's responsibilities. This is your event management plan. So your event management plan, or your EMP, is designed to be circulated to all major stakeholders and team members so everybody is clear on procedures, plans, and ultimately what to do if anything was to go wrong. This helps eliminate grey areas because it is murky in the grey areas and that's where things become unclear and go wrong. Your event management plan also needs to be submitted to your local authority, who then collectively feed in from the SAG group, Safety Advisory Group. That is made up of various different teams, representatives from the police, ambulance services, fire services, highways, environmental health and more. They will feed back and ultimately they are there to help you build a better event. They might question things, they might have suggestions or feedback, but ultimately it is to feed into providing one safe event. Though your event management plan is designed to help you deliver an event safely and without issues, we do work in live events and it is inevitable you will face some unforeseen hurdles. Whether that's bad weather, whether that is suppliers pulling out, whether that's potential overcrowding at an event because it's so popular, or in more recent times perhaps it's COVID affecting workforce. Knowing who needs to be involved in the chain of communication is incredibly important. There's a big difference for who wants to be involved and who needs to be involved, but the more streamlined you can make your communication plans, the better. OPA's top tip, be prepared for change, stay agile and build in flexibility. Okay, so talking about the team that you need around you, realistically, who you need in the room, who you need working on the event is scalable depending on obviously your budget, the production management, the production demands and the risk involved. There's a load of roles that you'll see be the same as when you're working in theatres or indoor events. However, there's some integral ones that you may not have come across if you haven't worked in the outdoors previously. A few examples of those might be your site manager. So they are ultimately operationally responsible for the build and break of your site, anything that goes on within it. Everything from marking out where things are going to be built, to fencing lines, to where your power is going to be installed, to managing the site crew to actually do the jobs. You might have a food and beverage manager who will coordinate your F&B offer. They look after any traders, make sure their documentation is in line, work closely with your site and production team to see them in and out again afterwards as well. You might also come across traffic management as well. They also come in and help you plan any road closures, help you work out what signage you might need, any diversions, and they will do that piece of work for you. Depending on the job and the event, you might have requirements for really specific job roles. For example, on Wondrous Stories, we had between 300 and 350 people per night to keep warm, looked after and well fed, from community performers with access requirements to riggers up on zip lines in the cold all night. So we created a welfare coordinator role whose job it was to keep everything from the tea and coffee topped up, replenish hand warmers, provide warm throws for those in a wheelchair, right through to setting up audio description headsets as well, setting up dressing rooms before people arrived, the list went on. So we are lucky enough to have a fantastic production team that we work with on an event by event basis. We've worked with them on everything from our kind of hyper-local community grassroots events right through to our larger scale spectacles as well. JA Productions, who are based locally, have been integral to our journey as an events company and our development and understanding the rigours of the production technical elements within event design and event delivery and ultimately event producing. So JA bring all their production staff, their technical staff as well, to fit the needs of the event and the needs of the site. And they have put together a very handy image, a very handy slide here, which highlights some of the different production roles and event staff roles that you might come across, that you might need to resource to build your capacity on site delivering events.
Thank you very much for listening to this whistle-stop tour of outdoor arts and how to produce events in found spaces and outdoor settings. We really hope that you enjoyed listening to us and watching some of the clips that we've put together for you. This has been a very quick session, but obviously it's a very broad session, and so we'd be happy to take more questions within the Q&A that's scheduled. We're always around if you want to reach out for us, and we have put a few resources together in where you can find other information. But we're right here, we're working in Birmingham, and we're really happy to be contacted and speak to more people to make more amazing outdoor events happen in this city.